The aspect of energy expenditure that is most under our control is how much activity we get every day, which is sometimes called activity thermogenesis, sometimes called physical activity. I'm calling it activity thermogenesis here so I can differentiate between its two components. Okay, so exercise activity thermogenesis, or like just exercise. In our first year courses, we learned that exercise is something that's planned, something that's structured. Its goal is to improve fitness. It is a form of physical activity that is quite intentional. And when we talk about physical activity, we kind of often put physical activity and exercise as meaning the same thing, but they mean different things, right? So exercise is like, I went to the gym and went on the bike for an hour this morning, right? That is exercise. I planned it. It was intentional, right? My goal is to improve my cardiorespiratory fitness, right? So that is exercise. And in general, exercise accounts for quite a small amount of total energy expenditure. And how much energy we burn during exercise is going to be dependent on a lot of different factors that I'm actually not going to get into too much here. But really, it's about intensity, duration, and type, right? Getting back to the frequency, of course, as well, the FIT principle of exercise, that the more often we exercise, the more intense the activity, the longer duration. And typically, if we pick a type of activity that is, let's say, more intense or burns more calories, then we're more likely to increase our exercise activity thermogenesis, right? So this just kind of gives you a basic rundown of the different kilocalorie per minute burn of different types of exercises, right? And yeah, running is going to burn more kilocalories per minute than slow swimming, right? But you could argue maybe some people can swim longer than they can run, right? So if I can swim for 40 minutes, but I can only run for 10 minutes, right? I might actually burn the same amount of calories. So duration matters. And in general, when it comes to exercise, aerobic exercises are going to burn more calories than resistance exercises, okay? But really basic breakdown of exercise and how it contributes to energy expenditure. Because I actually want to spend the majority of this submodule talking about non-exercise activity thermogenesis, also abbreviated as NEAT or sometime as NEPA, right? Non-exercise physical activity. Okay, so this is all the movements of your body that burn calories in a day, all the non-life sustaining movements in a day that burn calories that are not planned and structured and whose goal is to promote physical activity. So right now, this is actually a bit of NEAT that I'm doing right now. I'm moving my hands around. When I teach, I actually don't like to sit. I like to move around more. So I'm getting more NEAT than, let's say, an instructor that sits on a desk or whatever and teaches. Okay, but even just like hand movements, walking to and from the bathroom, cleaning up your home, these all are part of this NEAT. So are things like fidgeting. Like some people are just fidgeting. I know some people that are just always like, they're just really interesting. Some people are just like, they're bouncers or they're always like tapping their toes or things like that. You'd be surprised how much that can contribute to total energy expenditure. Okay, so NEAT is the energy expended for everything we do that is not sleeping, eating, or sports-like exercise. Okay, and it accounts for about 20% of daily energy expenditure, and it is highly variable, right? So some people, they really don't get a lot of NEAT. I used to be one of these people where I would get a lot of exercise, but not a lot of NEAT. So I would, and sometimes I still do this. So sometimes I would like go to the gym for 30 minutes or an hour, but then I would stay sedentary for the rest of the day. So my exercise related energy expenditure was high enough, but my non-exercise activity expenditure was quite low, right? And that's something that I've really been working on improving, is just moving around the house more. It's hard to do when we're working as hard as we are, but this is something that contributes to total energy expenditure. Okay, so jobs can really affect NEAT. Your body composition, usually the higher weight a person is, the more total calories through NEAT they're going to expend. Unsurprisingly, as we often see, men tend to have higher levels of NEAT. Do see low levels of NEAT in individuals with obesity, and then it's a bit of a chicken or the egg question, right? Do low levels of NEAT promote obesity, or is it that when people have obesity, right, they're spending maybe more time being sedentary? The obesity is leading to the lack of physical activity, the lack of non-exercise physical activity, right? Instead of the non-exercise physical activity promoting obesity. And it probably is more of just like a reinforcing feedback loop is what it truly is, okay? So this slide is interesting because it actually shows you some neat activities and how much they can increase energy expenditure above rest, right? So standing versus sitting, right? There's a modest increase there. Even gum chewing can increase your total level of NEAT. Fidgeting, right? And again, it depends on the person. But of course, walking and how much we walk around the day and the intensity at which we walk, the velocity at which we walk is going to impact our total amount of NEAT. Now, this slide is really interesting because it shows that some people, never all, some people might compensate for overeating by increasing their NEAT, right? And actually, you might know this, like right here, it's just Christmas. Christmas has just passed, and I ate a little bit more over Christmas than I usually do. And I noticed in the next few days, I wanted to, even on Christmas Day, like I wanted to move around more, right? Even late at night, I was like still cleaning up and I couldn't stop myself. So I compensated a little bit, probably not enough, for all the extra kilocalories I consumed by increasing my NEAT without even, I just realized that I did that now, right? I didn't even mean to do that. It wasn't intentional. Okay, so this study is interesting because what they did is they took 16 healthy subjects and overfed them by a significant amount. That's quite significant, 1,000 calories a day, kilocalories a day, right? Over their baseline needs, right? And what they found is that in the people that basically didn't gain weight, they just transiently increased their NEAT. The reason, right? So the more people increase their NEAT, there's a change in NEAT, right? So the more people increase their NEAT, the less likely they were to gain fat mass. And the less they increase their NEAT, right? There's just a little bit of an increase there. The more likely that 1,000 calories was basically translated to an increase in fat mass. Right? So it's really interesting how we have, sometimes without knowing, all these compensatory mechanisms worked into our physiology. And like actually the reason we do this isn't clear. The mechanisms behind it isn't clear. But it's interesting that some people just, their bodies compensate. They learn how to compensate for increasing energy intake by increasing energy expenditure without like going to the gym. But just moving their bodies more. Really interesting. And that's why just kind of throwing in a little bit of extra here. I was kind of looking at the kind of most current literature around the concept of NEAT. And actually a lot of articles were popping up around like modifying workplaces in order to promote more movement, basically. But this paper actually went further, and I don't expect you to memorize this. This is just for interest. This paper actually just went over the different ways that a building could be changed to potentially improve the amount of physical activity, the non-exercise activity that people are doing in their day, which can promote health, right? And maybe even promote mental health as well, and maybe even social health, if that helps you move around and meet people a little bit more. So really fascinating area of research, okay? So that's it. We just talked about exercise and how that promotes energy expenditure. Sure. We just talked about NEAT and how that promotes energy expenditure even more so than exercise. Cool. Okay. And so a common belief out there is that if I want to, let's say, lose fat mass from my body, one of the main ways I should do that is to increase exercise. Okay, you might have just realized that we should also probably increase NEAT too. And yes, increasing activity thermogenesis, increasing the total amount of calories we burn through the voluntary movements of our body, that absolutely can contribute to energy expenditure. However, it's not necessarily linear. What do I mean by that? It doesn't necessarily work that the more physical activity we do, the more we will expend energy. This here is something called the additive model of energy expenditure. But what this seminal paper from 2016, right, suggested and helped to corroborate is the fact that above a particular threshold, more physical activity doesn't actually result in more energy expenditure. Okay, so the graph I just drew out on the last slide, that is this additive model of energy expenditure, which means that, okay, we burn energy for all these other reasons, like basal metabolic rate, thermal effect of food, right? And then as we increase our energy, so as we increase our physical activity levels, you will see a linear increase in total energy expenditure. However, what they found, and other studies have supported as well, is that yes, increasing levels of physical activity are associated with increasing levels of energy expenditure, but only to a point. And beyond that point, right, which is not a black and white point, although I will quantify it on the next slide, there seems to be a plateau. And that's a big difference. If I look kind of from here to here, that's a big difference in energy expenditure. Even though it's just a conceptual model, you still get the idea. And the belief with this constrained model is that humans actually compensate through drops in basal metabolic rate, or maybe through NEAT even, right, to help to make sure that we don't burn too many total calories, which sounds like a good thing if you're trying to conserve energy, because maybe you're in hunter-gatherer times. But if you are trying to lose fat mass from the body, this is maybe not the best news if you are using large amounts of exercise and physical activity as your main routes to drop fat mass from the body. Okay, so here is the actual data that supported this constrained model, right? So what they did is they used a sample of 332 people where they put accelerometers on them, and they measured energy. They used accelerometers to measure physical activity, and they measured energy expenditure, which with one of the gold standards we use for measuring energy expenditure, which is doubly labeled water. And they compared how much exercise are they getting with how much energy they're expending. And they found that the top third of these people, top thirtile, how do you say that? The top third of these people actually showed more of a plateau. For the bottom 2/3, so what I mean by the bottom 2/3, people who got like the bottom 2/3 amount of exercise, of physical activity, I should say, yes, there was a correlation between the more physical activity they did, the more physical activity they did, the more energy they expended. There was a clear slope there. But past a certain amount, those getting the highest levels of exercise, they weren't getting that extra. There was none of this like linear relationship with those high levels of physical activity and much higher levels of energy expenditure, right? So the relationship was markedly stronger over those lower levels of physical activity versus the higher levels, right? So just to summarize kind of what that study showed, rather than increasing linearly in the dose-dependent manner predicted by the additive model, right, this model, okay, the relationship in physical activity and total energy expenditure plateaued over the upper range of counts per minute per day, which is how they kind of put all that data together in counts per minute per day, right? Representing that top third of people. So compensatory changes in energy expended on other activities, they may be compensated. Maybe it has to do with a drop in metabolic rate as well, but maybe it's probably NEAT, right? That's also dropping to help compensate. And looking into this literature, and when people talk about like why would we not just burn more calories the more we move? One of the arguments that's sometimes given is that like it's a compensatory mechanism, kind of based on our hunter-gatherer days. That let's say you have to go out and search for a lot of food. You're hunting, you're gathering, you're being active to get that stuff, right? Maybe you have to do a lot more scavenging, more hunting, more gathering. You don't have, if you're like not getting enough food, you don't have that food to help build up your energy. You don't want to be expending so much more energy over that top range, right? If it's causing you that much more to go and find food, right? You actually want to like decrease some of your energy expenditure so you're not like totally depleted by the time you find food. That's one argument that is given. So bottom line is physical activity is important for energy expenditure, not as critical as basal metabolic rate, but we have control over physical activity, right? But total calories burned does not necessarily increase linearly with the amount of physical activity, especially beyond a particular threshold, okay? So more is not always better, but regardless of how many calories you're burning from physical activity, never would I ever tell someone not to be active. It is one of the best things we can possibly do for our overall health. I love the line, you lose weight in the kitchen, you gain health in the gym, right? Because being physically active, and you don't have to go to the gym to be physically active, but being physically active is one of the best possible things. If there was a magic pill, it would be physical activity, right? However, if we are looking at losing body fat mass, decreasing energy intake is probably going to have way more of an effect. And we'll look at this again when we get to strategies for weight reduction later in the course. Okay, so one more submodule to wrap up this unit. I want to look at the thermic effect of food in the next one. See you then.